What's up guys, Shawnthebro here. Today we're going to be looking at abilities in the first-person shooter tutorial. However, these abilities will pretty much function the exact same way in any tutorial you were trying to follow or in any project you're trying to use them in. So essentially what we're going to be doing is we have two boxes in the lower left-hand corner. So that's the HUD component. We're going to do the actual logic for the abilities today in code, and then we're going to use a HUD to show what they look like. So if I press Q right now, then I get maximum of 5 jumps at a time. Okay? And I know I'm like mashing my keyboard in your ears, but I can jump all the way up here. Now, when the ability is gone, I can only jump once. If I press E, I get super speed, so I can walk 5 times the speed of normal. It will wear off after a designated duration that we set. And then once the cooldown for the ability is finished, then we'll be able to use it again, as you can see here. We can also use them at the same time. Okay, so we're going to get started, but that's what we're doing today. We're making the abilities in C++, and then we're going to assign them to the HUD elements to actually be able to show you how to make it visible to the player. So if you open up your character, your C++ character, and if you're new to the series, first of all, here's an episode in the top right corner. It's a little iCard. If you want to see the first episode of this series, it'll bring you there. That way you can get caught up. If you're just interested in abilities, that's fine. Just go File, New Project. We are using the C++ first person. However, you could do this in Blueprint, and it wouldn't be pretty much any more difficult, to be honest. We just happen to be doing it in the C++ one. So if you're using a Blueprint first-person shooter template, just go to your character, BP. Same thing. We're going to add some stuff here. It's going to be quite a bit this time, actually. Nothing too hard, but we just have to add quite a few variables to actually keep track of everything. Excuse me. So what we're going to want to do is add 8 different variables. Now, this will depend on how many abilities each character has. Like if we have an ultimate ability, we'll have a third one here for all of these. And you could technically change this into one variable for a lot of these, but that would imply that you're not going to use them at the same time. And that's most of the time not the case. It can be, depending on the game or the character. But what we're going to want to have is has used ability 1 and 2, which this is essentially saying, have I activated the ability? And once this is true, it basically means that the cooldown has to start and that we want to perform our logic from these abilities. So you can see the comments here. Determine if the character has used their first ability, has used their second ability. Easy. Make sure that U property, edit anywhere blueprint read write is available, because we're going to use this in the HUD to determine if we should change the icons in the ability icons. Okay, and then this one does not need to be it does not need to be a U property, but what we're doing is ability 1 duration, ability 2 duration. So if the ability is going to have a certain time frame allotted for it, and then the cooldown is separate from that time frame, meaning like if I press the button and the ability goes for 2 seconds, but the cooldown is 5 seconds. So there's a moment in between of 3 seconds where my ability is no longer active, but I also can't use it again. This is a good example in pretty much all Overwatch abilities, or like Octane Stim, or pretty much any game that has abilities in it. I'm just trying to give you some examples of what that looks like and why duration is different from cooldown time. So this could also be, you might not need it, depending on what your abilities are. Like if your ability is to get a mega jump, then, if you do that one time, then you don't necessarily have a duration for it. It's just, yep, I've used it, so once I hit the ground, then this ability is no longer valid until it cools down. I don't have any sort of duration. You could just set the duration to 0. No biggie. Make sure you have that for all your different abilities. Okay, and by the way, if you're going to have a lot of abilities and you didn't want a boolean for each of them, you could make an array, a T array of all these values, or t-array of struct called abilities, something like that. I figured 2 or 3 is pretty much the standard if you're doing like a character-based shooter or a class-based shooter. So I'm not too worried about that. But if you're using this for a single-player game and you have like a tree and you're going to have 1820 abilities, you should probably make an array so you don't have to have all these variables. Okay. Then we're going to want to have the cooldown time. So remember, the cooldown time is the time from when I press the button or from when the duration runs out. You can do either. It doesn't matter how you actually do it, just as long as you know that the cooldown time should be longer than the duration. So I have this one as blueprint read write. However, we don't use it in the HUD in this episode. What you could use it for is you could use this to actually make the HUD show it like it could give you the time remaining of the cooldown and things like that. So it would let you know how far off you are from actually being able to use it again. That would be helpful. Probably something we definitely should do. I just didn't get around to in this episode, so we'll do it down the line. But that was my intention of leaving this blueprint read write. And then same with ability 2, cooldown time. Okay, lastly, what we need are timer handles. So timer handles are something that we've covered, excuse me, I can't talk today, covered in some of the other tutorial series. So a timer handle is essentially a timer. It's a reference to a timer, basically. So what you can use these for is the get timer and set timer functions, which we'll get to in a minute. But what that does is allows you to give it a designated time, and then it will call a function. So this is extremely useful, because all we have to do is, okay, the duration has run out, then we want to set the function to trigger our cooldown time to decrease, vice versa, things like that. So that's this timer, this F timer handle makes it a lot easier. You could do it with, the standard old check the delta time and subtract the seconds, but then you got to reset the cooldown time. It's much easier to use a timer handle. Okay, so I wanted to go pretty in depth there because there's a lot of variables. We don't usually make that many variables. It'll go a little bit quicker from here on out. But we're also going to have quite a bit of functions this time around. So we want to have use ability 1, use ability 2, reset ability 1, reset ability 2, and ability 1 cooldown complete, ability 2 cooldown complete. So what these are, use 1, use 2, are when you press the button, it activates the ability. That makes sense. However, what we're doing here is once the duration of the ability runs out, if necessary, if relevant. So if my 2 seconds runs out, doesn't mean the ability has cooled down yet, but my duration for the ability has run out. Well, I want to reset the logic and go back to the normal state of things. Then, once the cooldown is complete, I want to reset the ability so we can use it again. So that's what these functions are for, and I just have one for each ability. Okay, so that's all for the header file. Again, if you're doing this in a blueprint, then the header file and the CPP file will be in the same thing. So make sure you just have those variables ready. Yep, okay. So if you go to the CPP file, what I'm going to do is set all these to the defaults in the constructor like we normally do. I've broken them up a bit so you can see them more easily. Has used abilities are false. Okay, I set ability 1 duration to be 5 seconds and ability cooldown time to be 3 seconds. Now, the reason I did this is because I only wanted to have 2 timers, not 4 timers, and we'll talk about that in a second. So the cooldown time is actually 8 seconds. The cooldown time fires and starts going down to 0 once the duration is finished. So in this setup, these are added together to get your cooldown time. So 8 seconds and ability 2 is 15 seconds. 10 plus 5 and 5 plus 3. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. It should make more sense why we're doing that once we get to the logic here in about 2 minutes or so. But you could just have 4 timer handles, and then you could set the cooldown times to be whatever you want. However, I didn't want to do that. I want to make it a little bit you know, I needed us to require less variables. Okay. Now we're finally going to make things happen. So if you go into the editor, go to Edit, Project Settings, Input, we're going to add 2 new action mappings. I called them Activate Ability 1 and Activate Ability 2. Call them whatever you want. Just hit the plus sign. I'll show you. It'll make a new one. Rename it to whatever you want. Select your key. You can search as well. I'm going to delete this because I already have them, but I have this set to Q and have this one set to E. Now, when you go into the code, assuming if you're doing the code one, you're going to look for this function. It's called Setup Player Input Component. This is where we bind all of our commands, all of our controls, to call a function. So, bind action, activate ability 1. Remember, this is the exact name of this stuff right here. Activate ability 1, activate ability 2. Activate ability 1, activate ability 2. Once we press the button, call this function. Use ability 1, use ability 2. There we go. If you're doing this in Blueprint, this function does still exist. So just find it, and you can set this up. You can also literally, and I'll show you, just in case you're doing Blueprint only, if you go into a character blueprint, give me 1 second so I can find it. Here we go. You can actually open the full Blueprint editor, and you can search for Activate Ability 1. So when this button is pressed, you do the logic here. Okay? So you can do this in Blueprint or C++. Okay. So go back to the code. Now we've set up our functions to be called. So let's go make our functions. So I made mine all the way at the bottom. Usability 1, usability 2. Here we go. So the first thing I do is write a log. You can copy this if you want. This basically prints a log to the output log to say that we have used an ability in the game. The main reason for this is debugging purposes. It is not at all necessary for the actual functionality. Feel free to copy this if you're interested. I just say the character has used ability 1 or ability 2. Then, here's what we're going to do. So once we use ability 1, we need to make sure that we have not already used ability 1, meaning that our ability is not currently unavailable. So usability 1 is going to set usability 1, has usability 1 to true. We want to make sure it is not true. That's what this exclamation mark is. When you see that, that means this is essentially the same as this. Has usability 1 is equal to false. But if you do a little exclamation mark not, then you're saying this is not true. This is not valid. That's what that means. So if this is false, essentially, then do this logic. We want to have it be false because if they've already used their ability, it hasn't cooled down yet. And if it hasn't cooled down yet, we don't want to actually be able to perform the actions. That wouldn't make any sense. So if we haven't already used the ability, say that we have used the ability, do the logic you want. In my case, I set jump max count to 5 because that's just what I figured I should do. Just an ability I thought of, so you can jump 5 times in a row. Then what we're going to do here looks pretty loaded, but it's actually a default Unreal functionality that we can add here. And this is what sets the timer so that we can determine when we should call reset ability. So get world, get timer manager, dot set timer. You can use your ability 1 timer handle. Okay, so use your timer handle because that's what the first argument of this set timer function is. This is unimportant for now, so just put this. The function that you want to call when the timer has ended. Okay, so when this duration, the next variable, runs out of time. Ability 1 duration is 5 seconds, I believe. Correct, it is 5 seconds. So when 5 seconds have passed after calling this, call this function, reset ability 1. False, again, I don't even know what false means at the end of this function. I never use it, so just put it to false. I can look it up if anyone needs help, but just I've never once set that to true, so just put it at false. It'll be fine. Okay, so what we're calling is reset ability 1, and you can see the same logic is in usability 2. If we haven't already used our second ability, we say that we are using our second ability, and then do the logic we want, setting max walk speed to like 8 times higher than what the standard is. Then I'm setting a timer to call reset ability 2 once ability 2 duration is done. Make sure you use ability 2 timer handle. The reason that I'm not setting the cooldown time to be a larger value and I'm adding the duration and then the cooldown time together, like I mentioned above, is because a timer handle can only handle one timer at a time. There are ways to set it up to handle 2, but if you do the same logic, like set timer, if I were to do this and say cooldown complete, like this, and have cooldown in here, when this one will fire, and then this one will fire, and since we're using the same timer handle, the set timer will be, it will skip this one. It will only set the timer to perform the second one, whatever one was last, before the timer actually fired. Which means this one will never get triggered. So you could do it all with one timer, but if you have to set 2 different timers, like how we have one for the duration and one for the cooldown time, then that won't work. Which is why I recommend doing one timer, and then when we get into the next function, reset ability 1, we set the timer for the cooldown. We'll get into that now, but I wanted to show you. So essentially, once you do the logic for usability, those functions, then you call a timer to reset the ability once your duration is up. Okay? And it sets my jump max count back to 1, so I go back to normal with my jumping, or it sets my max walk speed back to 600, so I can no longer walk like a superhuman. Then, once that logic is done, we use the same timer handle as above, because now our timer has already completed, so we can reuse it safely. So you call set timer, same function, ability 1 timer handle, but I use ability 1 cooldown complete instead of reset ability 1. Then we use ability 1 cooldown time, and then same with this. Ability 2 cooldown complete, ability 2 timer handle, ability 2 cooldown time. And then, in those, I just set has used ability 1 to false, has used ability 2 to false. These abilities are ready to be used again. Okay guys, and that's all for the code. So I'm going to scroll back up to the top, make sure you build, and then compile, or rebuild with the editor closed. Build and compile here. Okay, and then once you've done that, you should actually have it working, but you might not be able to tell it's working once it's done compiling without the HUD, depending on what actual abilities you gave to the character. It might be hard to tell, it might be hard to see, especially without animations or things like that. So now what we're going to do is add some stuff to the HUD. If you've been following the series, you'll see the out of ammo and clip max stuff is already here from the last episodes, but don't worry about that. If you are interested in that, I'll link an iCard here to those specific episodes about how to get your current ammo, the total ammo you have in your weapon, and if you're out of ammo or not. But otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to add 2 images. So literally image, and just drag them. Just literally left click and drag them. Resize them. Set their color and opacity to whatever color you want. There you go. I already made 2. They're right here. I called it ability 1 image, ability 2 image. So you can make those whatever you want. They could be buttons, it doesn't matter. But image, I think, is the best one for that because you're probably going to have an actual image here, a symbol, or some sort of icon, not just a random colored box. But for now, the colored box works since I don't have any actual art for it. So these are your 2 icons for your abilities. If you click on one of them, you can go to the color and opacity section where I set the color, but then hit bind next to it. Just like brush has bind here. If you haven't bound anything to it, you'll be able to hit bind right here. So click on it, color and opacity, bind. When you hit that, it'll bring you into this. It'll have the name of your image, color and opacity, and then you'll have a return node with an image as the return value. Okay, so you have this node right here and this node right here. What we're going to want to do is determine what color it should be based on if we've used our abilities or not. So I'll play it again. So they are green and blue when they are full. If I use one, it goes to gray. If I use the other, it goes to gray. Then when they cool down, not when the duration is up, but when they cool down, they're going to go back to their normal colors, their original colors, I should say, and that means that they are ready to be used again. Okay, so we're going to perform that logic right now. What you do is in binding, get player character 0. If you're doing multiplayer, you'll have to determine what character is the owner of this widget, and that's fine. That's easy enough to do. We are spawning the widget in the level blueprint right now. You can literally just set the... Is it character or controller? I can't remember. It's the controller. Great. Okay, so you can literally, if I could type, set this, and you know, if you're doing multiplayer, you'll have the actual player controller and not just 0. But then you could use player controllers, whatever, that went in as the owning player of this widget, as the, you would do this, get owner, what's it called? Get player, get owning player. Here we go. Sorry, took me a second. And then you would cast this. There you go. So if you were doing multiplayer, you could do that. You wouldn't need to actually get player character 0. So this can work for multiplayer. It can work for local multiplayer or online, whatever. Just make sure you're putting in the character you want to put in there. If you don't have any better way than the default types, or if you're only doing single player, then feel free to just use get player character with index 0. Okay. Cast it to your character that we just put all the variables in. If you're doing BP, you can still do this. Just make sure you cast it to your blueprint version of the character. Check for has used ability 1. If they have, we want to return this gray value. So to determine your gray value in the return node, just click on the little image. You can set it to be whatever you want. Whatever it says in new is the color it will be. Hit OK. I hit cancel. And then if false, we have not used our ability 1, then, or its cooldown is complete. We haven't used it or its cooldown is complete. Then we want to set it back to the color, whatever color we want to use. And luckily, get ability 2 is the exact same, except when you get your player character, cast it, make sure you look for has used ability 2. And then when you have, set your colors back to normal. Okay, you'll see I've added nothing in the event graph, and get ammo is from last time, so don't worry about that. But yeah, that's all. You just add those two. And then when the cooldown is complete, this will go from the color that you set for when you've used it back to the original color on both of these guys. So there you go, guys. When you play it, you'll be able to have your two little objects here, and you'll be good to go. Alright guys, so that's the end of this tutorial. I really hope it helped. This was a requested tutorial in the Discord, and I was very excited to actually do this one. So, very glad that I finally got around to it. Hope that this one is actually helpful to you. And the best way you can help is to subscribe. That helps me more than anything else you can do. And I just really appreciate it, to be honest. It shows me that you're interested in these types of videos. It shows me that it helped you and that I did a good job on it, so that I know to keep up videos like this in the future. All that good stuff. If you do need any help, or if you have any suggestions or ideas for the channel, you can join the Discord. I can't put in an iCard because of how YouTube is weird. However, there is a link in the description where you can come join the Discord. We've got almost 100 members, so we have people who can help you out from all different skill sets, and we'll be able to get you set up, working properly, and fix other projects you have. If you have issues, you know, we can talk through any of that, or we can just have fun. Easy peasy. Lastly, guys, if you want to come support us on Twitch, we're going to be starting Resident Evil 3 as of today. Now, check your date. We might have already done it, depending on when you're watching this. But we do Resident Evil Friday regardless, and we do Dark Souls, or Souls Wednesday. And then usually like Monday, Tuesday, or Saturday is a multiplayer game with friends. And that's Shawnthebro27 on Twitch. I can show you a little iCard to the YouTube channel of that right now. But so anyway, guys, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one, where we do the fighting game camera part 2 and finish that up. Alright guys, I'm Shawnthebro. See you in the next one.